Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Jessica Harvey. I'm the Product Marketing Manager for Microsoft Azure here at TOD On Demand, and we are very excited to be hosting you today. I just thought before we jump in, I'll just give a little bit of background on how we got to this topic. So I jump on quite a lot of calls with our partners and with your BDMs and account managers, and something that's come up a lot is that we have a lot of questions on how do I have specific conversations with various decision makers and personas at an end customer level, because each persona will have a different concern when it comes to Azure and migrating, and we get that question quite a lot. So we decided to go a little bit in depth on it today. So we've got OT on the call. I'm sure you all know Othello Vieira. He's our technical Microsoft CSP product manager here at TOD On Demand, and he'll be taking us through the session today. But before we kick off, I just thought I'd mention the personas that we're going into. So we'll be discussing today the CEO, so around operational efficiency with Azure, the CFO or finance persona, which is talking about obviously cost optimization and budgets, and the IT manager, so talking about security, redundancy, compliance, etc. So I want today to be quite informal, really open. I'm sure you have a lot of questions around, these various scenarios and personas. So please, throughout the session, you're welcome to pop your hand up or post in the comments. I'll be monitoring all of those. And if you want to do it throughout the session, you don't have to wait till the end. I think it's great, if we keep it quite interactive. And I really want you to leave here having those questions answered and knowing, where you're going forward. So, yeah, without any further ado, I'll pass over to OT. Thanks, OT.
Thanks a lot, Jessica. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time. As Jessica Harvey said, my name's Othello Vieira, Technical Product Manager, CSP. So one of my roles, for those on the call who don't know, is I actually have these conversations with partners, going to customers, speaking to the decision maker, the CFO, the IT manager, anyone who's looking at maybe moving into Azure. I assist partners with these conversations. Like I said, that they do take me to their customers. So a lot of the stuff that I'm going to cover today is stuff that I've actually covered in some of the meetings. And I'm also going to cover some of the stuff that have come up in those meetings where I've thought like, oh my word, how are we going to do this conversation now? Because I'll be honest with you, I've gone to a couple of weeks ago, I went into a meeting where the customer said, Othello, thank you for coming. Just so that you know, there's nothing you can say that's going to move me into any cloud. Nothing. I'm on-prem. This is where I'm going to stay. Sweated a few bullets. I said, okay, let me do my pitch. When I walked out that meeting, we're now currently running an assessment for that customer to move into the cloud. So even though he was very adamant that he didn't want to move, I think I might have planted a few seeds. And in essence, that is what the conversation is sometimes, you're very adamant that I'm not going to go in that direction. That's definitely not what I want. But if you plant a couple of seeds, and that's what I kind of do. So I'm not a farmer, but that's something that I want to do. So let's plant a couple of seeds. Like Jessica said, I see a lot of people are on this call. Some of the people I know, some of the people I don't. You've probably had different conversations with different customers, and they might have had a question, or they might have thrown a curveball or sideball or that kind of thing. Then maybe, how did I answer this, or what would be a better way of answering this? Please, when I get to that, or even if I don't get it, if you have a question that pops up now, please just pop it into the chat, send it to Jess. Let's try and answer it now. If I can't get an answer for you now, let's just do that. So I just want to be upfront and forward. I do apologize. I have not prepared a PowerPoint presentation. I did start. I just think everyone at the moment is PowerPoint fatigue, so I'd like to try and do conversational. I do have a lot of resources that I'm going to go through. They're all public facing, so it's not Othello doing smoke and mirrors, that kind of thing, so you can see. Cool. So 3 personas. All right. The decision maker. And those guys are normally they run the business. And their big thing is, how do I grow my business? How do I use Azure growing my business? I've just purchased hardware. You now want me to move to the cloud. I know it will make my business better, but, I've just bought this hardware. How do we do this? That kind of thing. Then we also have the CFO, and as we all know, they have the money. So Jessica, to me, is actually my CEO and my CFO, because I'll pitch an idea to her and then I'll ask her for the money. And apparently she doesn't have cash, but then she has cash. I don't go, how CFOs work, eh? And a CFO's main objection is, I've just invested X amount over the last year. If I move to the cloud, what happens to that current investment? I've just spent all this cash. You're going to tell me to start fresh. So how do we leverage what you've currently spent? And there's some conversations we can have about that, some tools I'm going to show you, that kind of thing, but even though you have purchased now, you have purchased hardware, how do we move into the cloud? How do we do an on-prem, those little servers that are sitting in the back of your closet, down in your garage? I know you might think, Othello, really, but we've seen some of the customers out there, how do we invest? How do we still keep that investment, but still, do a hybrid approach maybe into Azure? Or let's say, how do we start doing stuff into Azure? That kind of thing. Then the IT manager, so how do we keep my data safe? Because if it doesn't work, the CEO and the CFO is going to be down on the IT manager. Why is my service down? Why aren't they up and running? So he's got a whole lot of concerns, like around data privacy, compliance. I don't know if people on the call have getting a lot of peer questions around compliance. I know on my side, I'm getting a lot of on the Office side, but not on the Azure side. That might be because Azure is now local in South Africa. So we can spin up resources in South Africa. But what do we do about moving that data out the country? That kind of thing. And those are concerns that we're going to have. Now, out of all these three guys that I've mentioned, all these three personas that we've mentioned, decision maker, CFO, and IT manager, there's three common questions that I've come across all of them. Okay. Number one, how do I get there? Right, which is how do I get to the cloud? Whether it be a hybrid, a full migration, in another cloud into Azure, how do I get there? Number two is what is it going to cost me? Because as we all know, even though the CEO, he's just got money to throw, because he'll just go knock on the CFO's door, everyone's always worried about what's it going to cost me, big concern. And then the third one and the biggest one, and there's always underlying questions to that, is when I'm in Azure, how do I check my costs? How do I monitor my costs? How do I control my costs? Is Othello, my IT guy, going to jump in there and spin up 50 Minecraft servers? Even though we budget 5,000 Rand, my bill's now sitting at 10 grand. How did it get to that? How do we mitigate that? Cool. So those are just some of the stuff that we're going to cover. So let's get started on that. As I say, if there are any questions, let's pretend we're in the boardroom and I'm having this meeting and I'm going to pitch Azure to you guys. And if you have any questions or any concerns or anything that just pops in mind, please just pop it in the chat or unmute yourselves and ask the question. I normally never share my screen properly, so let's give this an attempt. Cool. See, Jess, my wallpaper matches your music and that wasn't planned.
Perfect.
Cool. So Microsoft has got something called the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework. Now, this is how do we get into the cloud? Now, a lot of people, they wake up in the morning no one wakes up 5 o'clock in the morning and say, I want to go into the cloud. Okay, they do wake up in the morning saying, oh, now I want to go into the cloud. But 5 o'clock in that afternoon, they're not in the cloud, right? So it's not a wake up one morning, I'm going to get this and migrate my whole business into the cloud overnight and it's there the next day. Okay, it doesn't work that way. As much as we'd love it to work that way, it doesn't work that way. So with regards to the cloud adoption framework, so there's a whole lot of guidance, so how do we get started? Okay, then you've got to think of a strategy, so for the decision maker and the CFO, and also the IT maker, the strategy, how do we get, so let's say I've got a payroll server sitting on premise, in the back of my in the back of my garage, in my rack somewhere, maybe in Terrico. How do I move that into Azure? What is my strategy? What is my company strategy to move into the cloud? So a lot of our partners have moved a lot of their customers into Microsoft 365. So they're currently consuming the Microsoft products, the Word, Excel, OneDrive, all those kind of features. But now how do we move the servers, the tin that's on-prem in a different premise, that kind of thing? How do we work together with that? So what is your strategy around moving to the cloud? Then obviously we've got a plan, right? So like I say, and that's a big thing is we don't move everything into the cloud. We need to plan, right? So this is a server I want to move into the cloud. How am I going to move my organization into the cloud? What do I want to move into the cloud? Then ready, so what are you ready? And they've got something like, operating model alignment, Azure setup guide, which I think is really cool. I'll show you guys now. So how do we get ready? Then migrate. What are the migration processes? How do I migrate? Am I on-prem? Do I want to run into the cloud? What are the best practices? Do we do hybrid where I run some of my workloads on-prem, which means I'm currently using my current investment? And how do I leverage the power of Azure or Microsoft Cloud to actually coincidentally work with what's on-prem, that kind of thing? Then how do we innovate? Like a decision maker, he wants to know, I want to move to the cloud. How do I innovate now? Because now let's say I've spent 2 bar And I hope some of you guys still get those 2-bar hardware orders. You know, we've got those, we've got that workload, but I see a lot of our competition, they're using AI and bot framework and AI and machine learning and all that kind of thing. How can I now use those Azure services to complement my hardware? Notice I'm using the word complement. I'm not throwing out your current investment. I'm complementing it. You know, so how do we innovate? That kind of thing. Obviously, governance is a big thing. You know, like now with the PA, like I mentioned, security around the documents. Are the documents safe in the cloud? That's not only just an Azure question. I think that's a general Microsoft question as well. What are you guys doing about keeping my documents safe? That kind of thing. What do you have in measure? You know, what do you have in place? You know, how do we manage it? Because the whole thing is great moving into the cloud, but now I've got an IT manager who now has to, shucks, I've now got to manage on-prem. I've now got to manage cloud. How do I manage all of this? How do I make sure everything is safe? How do I make sure everything is secure? You know, that kind of thing. And then how do we organize? You know, so how do we get the organization alignment? You know, CFOs on board. How do we get the CEO on board? How do we get the IT manager on board? You know, that kind of thing. So that is what the framework goes. And they've actually broken it down. And one of the beautiful things is a strategy. You know, the business outcomes, the financial considerations, and the technical considerations. Everyone wants to move to the cloud. And I'm like one of those guys who early adopters, I love cloud. You know, I love all the latest technology and I'll just jump foot forward, you know, but I don't have an organization. I don't have people's salaries that I'm paying. I don't have an organization that I need to keep up and running, you know. So what are my business outcomes that I'm looking for? What financial considerations do I have to look into, and what technical considerations? Now, one of the cool things about this is I've also got like it's called a cloud journey tracker. I call it a little diary. So it actually starts off, how do we start off? You know, so I've started my class assessment 9:15. If you guys had seen this earlier, it would have been 3 o'clock in the morning. But yeah, so I've started at 9:15. You know, how would I? So you start filling in these little, you know, you start filling a little survey and it generates a little map for you, like a little journey. This is what we should be looking. That's what we should be thinking. Right, cool. Then we've also got the Azure setup guide. So a lot of people say, well, in Azure, what do I do when I'm in Azure? You know, and some of the stuff or some of the concerns that all the personas have. You know, how do I manage cost and billing? How do I plan governance, security, and compliance? How do I do monitoring? And how do I stay current with Azure? So they've got little templates on how to organize your Azure to actually knock each of those little, you know, the decision makers' questions, the CFO's questions, and the IT manager's questions, you know, that kind of thing. So that's kind of cool. So that is the cloud adoption framework. Now, one of the big things, like I said, the 3 questions that we normally get is, number one, how do I get there? So going through the cloud journey, let me just go back here. Go back to over here. Right. Okay, so I'm going to have browser fatigue or browser history hunting. Okay, so how do we get in there? The cloud adoption framework. And obviously reaching out to us, Tasks on Demand, we'll be able to assist you with that if need be. You know, and we're happy to get on those calls with you, with the partner, to the customer. This is the current solution. How do we get into Azure? Happy to have that conversation with them. Okay. Second thing we have is cost. So the biggest concern is, Othello, what am I currently spending in Azure? And that is from a CEO, a CFO, and also an IT manager. I want to see my costs. I don't want to get and I'm sure we all used to call it a cell phone fright. I don't know if anyone still gets those, you know, especially with data. You know, I spent X, I want to see X. So in Azure now, as you all know, they've moved over to the new commerce platform. One of those things is called the Azure Plan. So in essence, what I have over here is I've just basically spun up, as you can see, Cloud Chicken Plan. I'm Portuguese for those guys who don't know me. And I've spun up a little server. And I'll just show you. So I've got all resources over here. See? So I've got my little VM. You see, I'm trying to, it's in a chicken coop. So I'm keeping to the chicken theme. The reason why I do that is because when marketing or when finance pulls an Azure bill, they say anything related to chicken, it's OT. So partners, that might be an idea. If you want to spin up stuff and get discount, maybe spin it up as chicken. You know, then we could get some, you know, you might get a bit of a discount there. So if we go here and if we go cost management, So this has been released a few months ago into Azure, and Microsoft's doing a big push around this right now. The pricing that you'll see in this portal will be the Microsoft recommended retail price. All right. So that is not what you on-bill to your customers. This is what you would see as the recommended retail price, and this is a dollar value. But the beauty of this is I can actually see what my actual cost is. And I've got it broken down by virtual machine, storage, virtual network, bandwidth, that kind of thing. I can do a forecasting. I've only spun this up yesterday, so obviously it hasn't forecasted. In about 2 days' time, happy for you to give me a call and I can actually show you what the forecasting does. But actually will forecast what I'm actually doing for a month. And I can break it down to resources, that kind of thing. So this is me being able to see my costs. Then I can also set up cost alerts. So I can say if VM reaches X amount of value, send me a notification, or maybe do a run book or that kind of thing. So the cost alert is actually very important. And then obviously I can also set up budget alerts. So I've only forecasted X amount. When it gets to Y, let me know. You know, that kind of thing. So Microsoft has done a lot of work in the last couple of years, and now they brought this to fruition. A few years ago, I think maybe you might or might have not known, there was a product out there called Cloudin. Microsoft purchased Cloudin. It became part of the Microsoft stack. And now they've actually built all those features that were in Cloudin, which is cost optimization, cost analysis, that kind of thing they've now built in. So this is just to show you how do we address that costing thing. I'm just showing it to you. So a lot of concerns that we've seen in the last couple of months is customers saying, I love Azure. I feel like you've done a great pitch. Customer wants to move in, but the biggest fear is what it's going to bill and what happens when those costs start spiraling out. And now with the built-in cost management and the cost analysis, we can now address that question. But that is not the only question we can address. So let's go back to our personas. I don't think there are any questions at the moment. If there are, please give us a shot. Cool. So we've got the decision. Sorry, Jess?
Just said no questions as yet.
Oh, okay. Damn it. No issue. Cool. So we've got decision makers, CFO, and IT managers. Right. So how do I grow my business? So we have a person or we have a decision maker, and he's just purchased hardware. It's now sitting on there. Okay. But now he wants to innovate. So we can do a hybrid solution, right? So we can connect your on-prem into the cloud. And in saying that, so let's say you've got a payroll server or that kind of server that is probably coming up for warranty now, right? So it's coming, the warranty is about to expire, and I need to move that in. Do I buy new hardware? As we all know, I'm sure we've all been in this industry long enough. A lot of customers will buy hardware with a 3-year warranty. They then upgrade that to another 3-year, take it to 6, and now they're going to try and sweat that asset, and they're going to let's sweat it out a bit more. All right. So the issue with that is I'm now running 6-year-old hardware. All right. So obviously technology has changed. If I buy new hardware, I've now got to get licensing for that hardware, which is also going to cost me a bit of a packet because, as we all know, SQL is quite expensive and per core, and it just becomes quite expensive. And then obviously, I now got to get extra warranty on that. And obviously, I'm not going to get an upgrade on warranty if it's 6 old. I can probably ask the hardware vendor, you know, guys, can you extend my warranty? And they go, with pleasure. Take out a second bond on your building, not your home, and then you can afford that hardware, right? So why don't we maybe move that little baby server into Azure? So let's migrate it, and there's some tools we can use around that called Azure Migrate, which will assist you in sizing what the machine would look like in Azure. And then we could do a hybrid. So I could run my payroll system in Azure. Once I'm happy with that, then let's bring everything else across. Or let me say, hey, what else can I be doing here? You know, that kind of thing. Or because I'm a CEO, I wake up in the morning and say, oh, I want to look at AI. You know, I want to look at machine learning, you know, that kind of thing. But shucks, I now got to go buy a new server for AI. I've now got to go buy a new server to do this, to do that. Why? Why not just spin it up in Azure? The beauty of Azure is pay as you go, right? So as I consume, I pay. When I don't consume anymore, I stop paying. And this is great because now, and I'll give you an example. So I've got this guy named Othello, and he's always got these great ideas. You can speak to Jess, got these great ideas. I'll go to the CFO and I'll say, buddy, I've got this great idea. We're going to make the greatest video game out there. And I need 100K because now I've got to buy hardware, right? So I've got to get hardware. I've got to get switches because the IT manager says, no, Othello, I'm not giving you any more hardware. All right. So I now have to do a purchase order. Let's say the CFO now gives me the money. Okay. I then go and I place my purchase order with the partners on the call. Well, actually not, because they're going to try to swing me to Azure, which is great. I now have to wait 6 weeks for that hardware to come in because, as you know, at the moment with the current world thing happening around with viruses and that kind of thing, hardware is coming in slowly. By the time the hardware gets here, my idea, because I'm a fellow, I know how my mind works. I've already forgotten about that idea. I've got the 100K hardware that I've spent. Please put it in the cupboard and I'll get to it when I get to it. where I could actually say, I've got this great idea. I've got this great machine learning idea. Let me spin it up in Azure, run it for a day. If I like it, I keep it. If I don't like it, I switch off. What happens? I only spend or only pay for the day that I spent. So that way CFO is happy. He's not spending cash unwillingly. I've tried my idea. It hasn't worked, or maybe it has worked, but nobody's liked it. So I don't have to actually have spent that money to move into the cloud. Okay, so that's one of the things that you can innovate with Azure. Also, how do we keep our staff productive? So a lot of the people are already on Office 365, and because it's Azure, the Active Directory is all locked in, right? So the rights and all that kind of thing is already in the Microsoft cloud. Adding Azure onto that will just make you slightly more productive because a lot of other features that you could do, like virtual desktop, that kind of thing, I can run in the cloud by keeping my guys more productive. Cool. And then we can also innovate. As I mentioned, if we look at what the Microsoft has got, so these are directory services of all Azure. And as we can see, there is I'm not going to use a really big word, but there is a Plymouth, I think is the correct word of using, of services we can use: virtual machine, DevOps, hybrid, multi-cloud, identity. There's a whole lot of cloud that I could actually wake up. Computer vision. Let's say I now want to, build a little scanning thing. I know I had a colleague of mine who was single at the time, and she wanted to do something called a Creep app. So we put a little app together where she could take a photo of someone on a phone, and it would do some sentiment and that, check Twitter, that kind of thing. What kind of profile does this guy have? Come back and say, yes, this guy is date material, or, what, be careful, that guy. I'm not costing money to go and innovate that way, which is really, really cool. So that's some of the innovation stuff we can do in Azure, which is really, really cool. Then you're going to have a customer, and this would be a CEO and a CFO saying, what's it going to cost me to get into Azure? I'm currently got this hardware that I've just spent X amount. If I have to, let's say, and I'm not saying you have to do this, if I move all my current infrastructure into the cloud, what's it going to cost me? So Microsoft has got something called the total cost of ownership calculator. This is out there, public facing. A lot of people don't know about this. And we normally sit with customers and we go through this. It's a little bit, not tedious, but it starts asking some questions. And some of the questions that they ask here is actually the questions that the guys have, and you can actually address them. So let's have a look at this. So I want to run a server. What kind of server do I have? Windows, Linux, physical server? Am I running a Windows operating system? What kind of operating system licenses do I have? How many of these servers, how many processors, cores, that kind of thing. And I can go and add my services. Am I running any databases? Maybe I've got a SQL server. So I'm just going to go, yes, I've got a SQL server. What version of SQL? Okay. Jess is my financer. I can run SQL Enterprise. Okay, no questions asked. She's happy to pay the core count, happy to do that. What operating system? That kind of thing. Then the storage cost. So what's my SAN costing me? And that's on-prem. And as we all know, SANs, even if you've budgeted well and you've thought about well, will always run out of disks, right? So you've got to add more disk, that kind of thing. Add that in. What kind of network am I running? Okay, so that's the basic stuff. Cool. Then we got some cost assumptions. I'm going to move this to South African Rand. I hope it's available today. I haven't logged in. Okay, but just keep this in dollar. Demo gods. Cool. Then we got software assurance. So one of the CFO's questions will be, I've now bought SQL licensing, or I've bought Windows licensing. I've got software assurance. If I move to the cloud, so let's say I want to move my whole environment, what do I do with that software? Because now I've invested that money and now it's gone. So if you have software assurance, part of software assurance that you get is something called Azure Hybrid Benefit. And what that allows you to do is, if I have a Windows licensing or SQL licensing that's on-prem and it's got software assurance, it allows me to use that license in the cloud. So let's say I've now purchased Windows Server on-prem. I now want to move to the cloud. With software assurance, I can use Hybrid Benefit, which means I don't have to now pay for new licensing in the cloud. Because as we know, the way Azure works is I spin up the virtual machine, I choose the operating system, and then Microsoft will bill me for as long as I use that operating system. There is a tick in Azure where I can say activate hybrid benefit. Cool. So I activate it because I know I've got hybrid benefit. I activate it, and guess what happens? I stop paying for either that SQL licensing or that Windows licensing because I have got the hybrid benefit. So that is, Mr. CFO, you're not going to lose your current investment. If you've bought software with software assurance, I can now use that to move into the cloud. And I can use that in a hybrid environment, whether I want to move everything on board. Whatever I want to do with that, I've got that, which is great. So that kind of addresses the CFO's question of what I do with my current investment. So if he's got the software investment, he can use it. If he's got the hardware, as I mentioned before, we can run a hybrid, run certain applications in Azure, run everything else on-prem, and then slowly either migrate everything across or leave everything the way it is. And when that hardware comes up for renewal, then let's start looking at, do we buy new hardware or can we actually move the stuff into Azure? So that will be CFO. This is how I save you money. There's another way of saving you money. But I'll get that into that shortly. Then obviously we got one of the big IT managers is, how do I keep my data safe? Is my data, what happens if a drive crashes? Where's my data going to be sitting? So in Azure, we've got certain things called local redundant storage and then global redundancy. So what we can do, we can set up your Azure environment where they've actually got availability sets and availability zones. So an availability set is it stripes your data, be it virtual machine or underlying hardware, across 3 of the racks. So if one of the racks goes down, you won't know it. Your virtual machine will still be running. All right. Now, to try and get that kind of redundancy on hardware, you have to pay a little bit extra. All right. Or on some vendors, you actually pay quite a bit extra because there's licensing involved with that kind of thing. Then we also have zone redundant. So in South Africa, we've got Microsoft data centers in Joburg and we've got in Cape Town. In each region, we normally have 3 data centers. So we'll a minimum of 2 data centers. So we'll have 3 data centers in Joburg, and we can have zone redundant. So we can have the data striped across 3 different zones. So we have 1 data center, 2 data center, 3 data center. 1 data center goes down. The other 2 will pick up the slack. So in essence, I've got the redundancy that I need. Okay, and that's basically and then the geo-redundant, so that's zone redundant, local redundant. Then geo-redundant is I can have similar redundancy, but that would be sitting in a different region. So that would be in our neighboring region is Western Europe, and that's where the data will be going. But we can set up how I want to set that up. Then we've got virtual machine costs. So virtual machine costs, as we know, Microsoft builds per second, and I'm going to run this for 4 hours. How do we optimize that? IT manager wants to save money because CFO wants to save money. Obviously, CEO also wants to save money. See, cost is a big thing for these 3 personas. Even though they're in different playing fields, money to them is a big thing. So I can run the machine. I can also set run books up in the machine. So I can switch off the machine when it's not being used, and I can power up again. A good example of that, let's say I have a payroll server, another payroll server, and I keep mentioning payroll server. I know it's not a big server. It's not a big thing. But it's quite a popular service. And I can shut down my payroll server at 6 o'clock in the evening, or I can then, I'll shut it down at 6 in the evening, and then I'll spin it up again, or I'll boot up again at 6 in the morning. Those hours that I'm not using, I can save. But then Microsoft also has something called reserved instances. So if we look at another tool here, which is the Microsoft pricing calculator, and this is the calculator that I use when I'm trying to estimate what exactly you want to pay. Because remember, I'm estimating. We can get a better estimate by running an Azure Migrate. So I could be in another cloud. I could be on-prem. I could even be in a private cloud. What is this server going to look like in Azure? If I run Azure Migrate, it will actually tell me this is what you're running, and we run that for 14 days. It will come back and say, this is what you're running. And we've seen that, right? We've all done virtual solutions. I've got a, 32 core machine, 128 gig of RAM. I'm using all those resources. You run the migrate and says, great, you've got 32 cores. You're only using 16 of those cores. You've got 128 gig of RAM. You're only probably using 64 gig of RAM. If you move the server into Azure, this is what the server would look like from a hardware configuration. Cool. So it gives you more accurate. So now CEO, CFO, and IT manager, they're happier because you've properly spec'd the machine. But back to the cost. So I've got pay-as-you-go costs, right? So pay-as-you-go, I'm running this for 730 hours. Cool. I'm then happy with the server. And there's a couple of tools in Azure which can let you know if you're happy or not happy with the server. I want to say, like a bond, I want to reserve this for a year. So Microsoft, I'm going to reserve this for a year. I would like to pay a year. I'd like to commit to a year, but I could pay annually or monthly upfront. So if you look, so pay as you go on this machine, I'm paying just under 2,500 Rand. If I reserve it for a year, sorry, let me just make this look like a proper. So I'm just going to go in South Africa. Okay, I'm going to go Windows. I'm going to just go normal 2-core, 8 gigs of RAM. So I'm paying just under, you see, just under 2,500 Rand. Okay, I'm going to reserve this for the year. My monthly now cost is now dropped to 1,800 Rand. I can pay that monthly. And then I can also do a 3-year commit. And we have a lot of customers at the moment doing the 3-year commit because the price is really, really good. So look at that. I'm doing 1,500 Rand a month. Then remember previously I mentioned the hybrid benefit where the CFO wanted to use what he currently had. If I now have hybrid benefit, so this is what I'm currently paying for my OS, 1,000 Rand. If I use hybrid benefit, look how my bill has now dropped. Okay, so this is how we can save the CFO some money. So you've got your current investment, great. This is how we can utilize it in Azure. Okay, and that would be something called reserved instances. Okay, so we've got that flexibility. So even though you're going to be paying 2,500 Rand to start off with, and I always say that, decision maker, CFO, run it for 3 months. Make sure you're happy with the way it is. Cool, then do it. We also have something built, a cool tool built in Azure, which anyone can use, and that's called the Azure Advisor. And what that can tell you, that tells me what my cost is. Now, I've only run this machine for a day, but under the cost benefit, it will actually tell me, oh, fellow, you could save X amount of money by RI in the machine. Not only that, Jess mentioned operational excellence. So if we click on here, it actually says we could actually use Lighthouse, to scale and upscale, that kind of thing. So in Azure, so it's not partner telling customer, or it's not a fellow telling partner to tell customer. You can actually log into the environment and see what can I do around cost? What can I do around security? And as you can see, there's a couple of things that my server hasn't enabled. I haven't enabled MFA. I haven't done log analytics to see what's happening on the machine. So these are small little features. IT manager gets addressed, how secure are my servers? I'm in the cloud. Everyone thinks you're in the cloud, you're secure. You're secure up to a point. Still old school stuff. I've still got to make sure those ports are closed. I've still got to make sure only certain people have access. That still plays a role. But the IT manager will now be happy because he's actually got all these features now built in that actually tells you, fellow, you've spun up the server. You've got the normal ports unblocked. Luckily, when I spun up the server, I blocked all the ports because I was going to use this for demo. But you see, I'm getting this information. So it's no longer I'm going into Azure to the unknown. I'm going in and I can make informed and educated decisions. Cool. So that addresses a lot of the what do we do at cost, what do we do about security, that kind of thing. Another big question that comes up is about compliancy. So what do we do about compliancy? So Microsoft has actually got something called, and it's called the Microsoft Trust Center. And I can go around privacy, and we've got a whole lot of things about that. Compliancy, a whole lot of things about compliancy. Or I like going to products and services. So I'm just going to show you. So I'm going to click on products and services. And then I'll follow what I want to look at. Microsoft Azure, Microsoft 365. Because I've got Jess on the call, I'm going to do Azure. And in Azure, I've got stuff around security, privacy, GDPR, the data location, the compliance. So I'm just going to go data location. And when I tried to do this morning, it didn't really, it's working now, cool. And what am I looking for here? So I'm looking for, and they haven't put South Africa was here. It's now no, just go one back. Data security, select geography. So this is around everything around the compliancy. There is a South African overview. I'll get to that. So they've got stuff around GDPR. There is a South African around PAPIA. So that is something around the Microsoft Trust Center. So that is something we can show your partners around trust. We've got security, we've got privacy, we've got GDPR. A lot of partners don't know, a lot of customers don't know, your data is encrypted at rest. So obviously when you set up the VPN connection, that's encrypted. When it lands on the data servers or on the servers, it's also, it's also encrypted at rest. One of the other cool little documents, it is a little bit old, and I know Jesse's probably going to ask me to do the TOS version of this. A lot of the stuff that I discussed around data center, security, hybrid cost, that kind of thing, assessments, hardware, speed, that is all covered here, and this is how I would answer that question. But let me get you some of the fun questions I've had now. So Some of the scenarios that I've been in, so I've gone to a partner and that one partner said, or that one customer said, oh fella, I'm never moving to the cloud. You can tell me what you want. I'm not going to do it. Cool. So I said, tell me a little about your business. So he runs a company that does some modeling, not pretty close modeling. He does some data modeling around some of the data that the company organization. So he does some of the financial stuff he does around that. And he's just onboarded 14 new customers, which is great for him. And now he's forked out that money to buy that hardware. He's now purchased, I think it was 5 bath kit. It's now, he's waiting for stock to arrive. He's going to install it, right? Which is great. So I said, that's great. The two thing I have is you've got to wait for that hardware to be installed. What are you currently doing for those customers? Can you onboard them on right away? Or Mr. Customer, I want your business, but you're going to have to wait a few days for me just to get the service up and running. Cool. So in Azure, 14 customers added on. I need up and down resources. I can do that on the fly. So that caters for that. Right. So that in essence, I've already planted a seed in his head about that. And I said, that's great. So you've got 14 customers that have onboarded. How long have you spec'd this hardware for? Have you now got budget now? Let's say it gets really, really well and your company works really successfully. Do you have another 5 bar that you can now spend out to increase that hardware as more customers come in? You know, and then you still got to wait another 6 weeks for the stock to arrive and that kind of thing. How do we cater for that? And that was a good question. Also said, let's say the business goes the other way. Well, I know you're very profitable and that kind of thing. What happens if 14 of those people, 7 of them decide to leave? I've now invested that 5 bar on hardware that in essence is going to be similar to like a white elephant. I'm not going to use all the resources. So that cash flow that I could have saved and could have used other things in the organization, you know, like maybe the petrol to keep those generators up and running, you know, because of the that phenomenon we have in South Africa called load shedding. You know, what do we do about that? You know, and he said, that's a very good question. He said, I do have a generator. And I said, and how's that cost? And that comes back to the cost of ownership. You know, so what am I paying for electricity? When a lot of people look at an Azure estimate, they forget about rack space rental. They forget about security. They forget about DR. They forget about keeping those data centers up and running. In Azure, you let Microsoft worry about that. Let them worry about the petrol price going up. Let them worry about, you know, the data center has to be up and running 24/7 because that's the SLA I've signed with you. Okay. So that was some of the stuff that he had in concern. So I'll go back to him now, but just so the electrical costs is that. Then what are we doing about IT labor? You know, so we've got hardware costs, software costs, electrical costs, you know, all the kind of costs that are happening here. And then we say, if I'm going to run this over 3 years, green is what my Azure cost is going to be. On-premise is what it's going to be. And it does a nice little graphy and, you know, because I know financial and COGS love seeing PowerPoint and graphs and this kind of thing. So it breaks it back down now. Cool. So that's some of the nice things that we can do now with this cost estimate. But back to my customer. So now he was like adamant he was going to stay on-prem. And I brought that up. You know, you've got cash flow and you've bought that hardware. Great. What do you do if the business kind of closes down or slows down? You know, I've now invested that 5 bar on the servers. How am I going to recuperate that money? Or is it just going to lie there? Is it just going to be something in the dust? You know, why don't you try, and we could do a hybrid setup, or you could use your on-prem licensing. We can put that in the cloud. We can spin up the service. I've got 15 customers that come up. Great. Let's spin up. Let's resize that server on the fly. And the beauty of it, if I'm running in Azure, and let's say we're doing SQL, because obviously he's doing data modeling and that kind of thing. I'm running SQL. I've started off with 4 cores. I now spin up to an extra 4 cores. I'm now running 8 cores. Okay. I've now got to, do I now have to go buy extra SQL licensing? I say no. What I do is because it allows me to scale up and down, my licensing adjusts as well. So if I scale up from, let's say I start 4 cores, I now adjust it to 8 cores, I now go to 16 cores. That licensing is all included in that machine, right? And let's say now 7 people decide to leave. So now I've got to scale down that server. When I scale down that server, that investment that I've made, I haven't outlaid any money now. I actually stop paying for those resources that I've switched off. So I've scaled up and I've scaled down, and my bill goes up and down as well. So in a way, I'm actually doing a bit of a cash flow story, which is really, really cool, because now I haven't now had to, number one, wait for stock to arrive, which I've been in the hardware game for a few years. more than a couple of years. I know how frustrating that can be when I've got a new project, I've got new customers I need to onboard. Shucks, I need this hardware now. Get on my phone, pass this distribution. Where's my hardware? It's stuck in a ship. Where's the ship? Oh, we've lost it. And that's a very common thing, Why don't they use Azure AI and let's work out where the ship could be? Maybe we should be talking to hardware vendors. But the point of the story is that we can scale up and scale down. Cash flow is not going to be too much of an issue because even though I haven't bought hardware, physical hardware, I can scale up and scale down. So in that way, the CFO is happy. Okay, he can now monitor his cash book. Obviously, then with the cost management tool, he can now see what he's spending, what he's not spending. Okay, if he's moving everything into Azure, those licensing that he's used on-prem, if he's got software assurance, he can use that or come to the CSP program. Let us show you how you can use your CSP Windows licensing for Azure Hybrid benefit, because that is something that we can do in CSP. So we're saving him money there. So from the CFO, he's happy. Control his cash book, control that. The decision maker, does he want to move to Azure? Maybe not. Maybe yes. Maybe some of the cool stuff I've told him. You've invested. Let's innovate. I wake up with a great idea for my new company or new subsection or new section that I want to start up in Azure, or a new company that I want to start. I've got this great business idea. I don't have to make big investment. Let me spin up an Azure subscription. Let me POC, or proof of concept my idea in the cloud. Let me see what it looks like. That's great. The IT manager is also happy because the data is secure. At rest. I'm compliant. Microsoft's got 1,000. Microsoft is one of the biggest compliance companies out there. Because as you know, they've got a worldwide footprint, and there's a lot of stuff, a lot of boxes that need to be ticked. That's why the data centers took so long to launch in South Africa, was there were a lot of boxes that needed to be ticked. So they're all happy on that kind of front. So all in all, moving to Azure, not that you have to move everything, but these are some of the conversations we have with the customer. This is how we can save you money, Mr. Customer. Everyone's about saving money. You want to innovate, we can spin it up in Azure. You want to switch off stuff, we can switch it off. We don't have to pay for that. About 5K server, I need UPSs to keep those servers up and running. I need power or fuel to generate in case the power decides to go down for a couple of hours. And when we had load shedding 4, I had another partner who's actually running on solar. And he says, "Oh, fella, I've got this great thing which works awesomely because we're in South Africa, when it's hot, the solar panels charge my UPSs. When the power goes down, it's great. The problem is when I hit level 4 load shedding, the UPSs don't have enough time to charge, to keep that charge for extra. And I've got international customers, no downtime. Let Microsoft worry about that, Bill. Let them worry about that. Let them worry about the fuel. Let them worry about the SLA, that kind of thing. Put it in their hands. At least you have a peace of mind that it can be up and running. And in that way, we've catered for the IT manager's question. Data is compliant. Servers are up and running 24/7, 365. CFO is not going to scream at you because something's gone down. The only time something would go down is maybe Othello decided to play around with PowerShell and deployed a script that automatically shut down a machine or moved the table in XSQL or that kind of thing. That would be the issue. But then in Azure, we could also do backup. So let's back up the servers. We've got that redundancy because Othello could be malicious. He could go in and actually delete a database. Because I can quickly spin up a virtual machine, just as quickly as I can provision a virtual machine, I can provision backup for that virtual machine. And I can say, back this up, keep this up and running, back it up every night, that kind of thing. So I've also I can sleep, knowing that that's up and running. So those are some of the questions that we come across when I'm talking across, to CFO, CEOs, decision makers, IT managers. I don't know if you guys have any questions for me.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thanks, OT. There's quite a few questions here in the chat. So first one is from Chantal. She says there might be a cosmetic question, but she's noticed that ZARR is pretty much moved everywhere, especially in AZ Calculator. Why is ZAR being removed?
ZAR. Okay, so just make sure when you log into the calculator that you're not logging into MCA. As I mentioned, we have Azure Plan, and I can actually show you that. It's not cosmetic. It's a Microsoft thing. Calculator over here. So as you see over here, pricing, I've got pay as you go. Okay, as I said, new Microsoft Commerce, which is that Azure thing that I showed you. That will be all dollar-based pricing. And South Africa is not, obviously we're in Rand. So that is why you won't see ZAR there, because MCA is the Microsoft Cloud Agreement, and that's linked back to Azure Plan. And that pricing you see in the portal is US dollars. the best way to get an estimate and what we do and speak to your BDM and they'll be able to assist you with pricing is I normally go Microsoft Direct and then I'll have ZAR available.
Thanks, OT.
I hope that answers your question, Chantal. And it's not a cosmetic. That is one of the most popular questions I get on a daily basis. So I'm glad I was able to answer it in this forum.
Thanks, OT. Second question is, do I need a separate server to run my SQL, or can I use the same Windows 2019 server just with the right resources allocated?
Okay, so it all depends on how you've purchased the licensing or how you purchased the server. A lot of people like to keep their SQL workloads on-prem because they can touch and feel and it's optimized that way. But you can move the SQL server into Azure if need be. But it all depends on the workload that you're running. So what I recommend doing is get in touch with us. We could run Azure Migrate, saying this is what SQL looks on-prem. This is what the Azure version would look like. But it all depends on what you want to do on how the solution is spec'd out.
Thanks,
that
OT,
answers that question.
I'm glad you mentioned Azure Migrate, because our next question is, I'm also very interested in Azure Migrate tool. Is it something that bears a cost, and is it rocket science to deploy? Okay,
so I'm just going to show you a little, we're a couple of minutes back. So Jess, if you'll allow me.
Sure.
Let me just show you what that looks like. Sorry, my wallpaper keeps coming up. Cool, so we can go over here. I'm going to type in Migrate. Got Azure Migrate over here. Cool. So running Azure Migrate, there's no cost to it. So what do I want to migrate? So what are my goals? Service, databases, web apps, database only, VDI solutions, which I think is really, really cool. Web apps. Databox isn't available in South Africa, so we're hoping that eventually we will get it. But we can do a Databox, but not available in SA. But we could do it in Western Europe. There's just a lot of costs involved in that. But not to digress, so we can go servers. And then just a couple of questions we need to answer. So number one, you have to have an Azure subscription. And as we know, to have an Azure subscription is free. Okay, Microsoft's not going to charge you to have the subscription. What we can do is we're going to call this, I'm just going to put this in my chicken coop as an example. I'm going to call this in my project as an example over here. Okay, in geography, South Africa. All right, I'm going to go create a project. So as you can see, it's not rocket science. Some of the rocket science, that stuff that has come across that we are helping partners with is, let's say, how do I install the agent on my on-prem machines? You know, obviously in Windows, you need admin access. On a Linux machine, you need root. If the sysadmin doesn't want to give you root access, there are a couple of ways around that. But what I want to do over here, and then we can go click on Discover. And then where am I coming from? Am I running VMware? Am I running hypervisor? Am I running physical? Or am I coming from AWS, GDP, Google Cloud Platform, or Zen Server? You know, so I just choose what I want. So I'm just going to go, yes, I'm running Hyper-V. But actually, hang on, let me actually do it the other way around. I'm going from a physical server. Where's my target region? And then confirm South Africa North, and then create resources. So what this actually does is, so the discovery is free, right? So it will go ahead and run the assessment after you install the agents and it create the link between your on-prem into the cloud. It starts gathering the data and it gives you a report saying this is what it's going to be. The cost will incur or start incurring when I actually spin up those resources. So now I'm doing the migration, right? To do the migration, it will then spin up. And in essence, what it does is a site recovery. It will spin up the resources in Azure. Obviously, when those resources start working, that is when I start paying. And when it starts moving that data into there, obviously the storage will start consuming, and that's when I'll be starting to pay. But to do the actual assessment, where I'm assessing what will my on-prem or my Hyper-V or that kind of service look like in the cloud to get that report, there's no cost to that. I hope that in a roundabout way kind of answers the question, Jess.
Perfect. Thanks, OT. And Chantal, if you do want to go more in depth on that, you're welcome to reach out to your TOD team member and we can set up a session to take you through that. Another question is, when migrating a server to Azure, which hosts SQL Server licensing, would the license for the SQL Server migrate together, or would new licensing be required?
So when we spin up the SQL server in Azure, when I spin up the server, I will say I want this SQL server. Okay. Once that is spun up, so I'll pay for those licenses. If I have hybrid benefit, I can switch off I have SQL hybrid benefit, and then I'll stop paying for those licenses. Okay. So the short answer is, when I spin up the SQL server in Azure, I will say I have a 4-core server. Microsoft will bill me for that license. Once the server is up and running, I can then activate hybrid benefit if I have hybrid benefit, and it will switch off that licensing. I hope that answers that question.
Perfect. Thanks, OT.
Jess, what I think we might want to do, if need be, these questions, we could just put them in a little document. I can go answer to them, and we can share with the team also with the links to, this is not an Othello speak, this is a Microsoft thing as well, so they can have confirmation that, yeah, OT is not having a bad day.
Definitely. Everyone on the call will be getting the just a deck with all of the links to the tools that OT has showed us today in Azure. Azure on the brain. So yeah, you will be receiving that. Are there any other questions that you want to ask just before we close off? Nothing. Okay, great. So from our side, we are creating an Azure incubator program. So basically, taking you through all of these things, how to have a conversation, to migrations, to technical assistance, and that's going to be launching next year, but there is going to be limited sort of seating available. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to post a link in the chat, and it will be on the thank you mailer. What we'll need you to do is, if you want to be part of that incubator where literally it'll take you through everything, we just need you to fill in the form that we're going to post on the chat now. And yeah, like I said, spots are limited. So if it's going to have to be first come, first serve. But if you can just jump on that form and fill it in for us, then you will be included in the Azure incubator that's launching early next year. That, like I say, will have sales assistants, technical assistants, and marketing assistants with Azure. Perfect. And with that, if there are no other questions, yeah, thank you, OT. Thank you so much for your time and for the information. I think it's really beneficial. Perfect. And definitely something that we'll be able to use going forward. If anybody on the call does have any questions, or you want to know anything else about Azure, you're welcome to reach out to your TOD representative.
What I will be sharing with everyone on the call and with the video is just a deck with, and I didn't do a PowerPoint, is with the persona and all of the questions that the personas had, and have direct links to the Azure portals and the Azure information, just so that the partners on the call can actually have a reference, this kind of decision and that kind of thing. I want to thank everyone for the time. Jess, thank you for allowing me to have this platform on the 1st of December. If we don't have any other Azure questions or any Azure webinars coming up, I'd like to wish everyone on the call a really prosperous, good December. Hope business goes really, really well, and that you all get the break or the rest that yeah, I think we've been looking forward since January, beginning of the year.
Definitely. Thanks, OT. Thanks everyone for joining.